was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. So, hello and welcome everyone to Peace with Penny. The first two broadcasts were about Israelis and Palestinians who work on peace, which you can find posted on my website at pennyst.com under podcasts for Peace for Penny. We took a breather from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with a lighter interview with Lior Eisenberg, who works on peace by holding chess tournaments with Israelis and other countries last week, including over 5 Arab countries with his organization Chess for Solidarity. Now we're back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with Belal. Thanks for joining us, Belal. It's great to speak with you. Belal is from Beit Umar and graduated from Bethlehem University in accounting. He is one of the leaders of the Israeli-Palestinian youth group at Roots Shorshim Judah, which brings Israeli and Palestinian teens together to discuss topics relevant to their lives. Belal says his role in Roots has changed him. He understands Israelis in a deeper way and has come to appreciate the importance of respecting the perspectives of others. Belal believes that it is crucial to speak with and respect people with whom one disagrees, and that part of being human is to respect and love people of different races and religions. Belal, you're 25 years old, born in 1996. Were you born in the West Bank?
Yes, in the West Bank, in a small town called Beit Umar, near Hebron and near Gush Etzion.
What was it like growing up in the West Bank?
Well, as long as I remember when I grew up, especially during the second Intifada, is that there was a lot of clash, there was throwing rocks. And as growing up as a child, you don't actually understand what's going on around you. You just see things and you feel that there's something unusual, because as a child you look and you try to go out, you try to discover the world, you try to play. And maybe I can say that for me as a child, my parents used to not allowing me to go out, especially during second Intifada and during 2001. And I always had this kind of emotional and questionable things about the world, that why I can't go out, why I can't go to play. And maybe a lot of people, today the world is different, but at that time, the only thing that you had is only as a child is not video games, it's not computers or phones. It was playing, going out to play, seeing and discovering the world. So it was a weird way of growing up as a child, I believe, and for all children that grow up in any kind of such an environment, I think it creates in them, or it can lead to some kind of emotional side effects that can appear on when people grow up, and that's very important to address, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Everyone I speak with talks about the fact that they never had interactions with the other when they lived in the West Bank. Did you have interactions with Israelis other than the IDF soldiers before working with Roots?
No, not at all. Israeli civilians, not at all. With IDF, yes. I mean, that's very normal actually here, is that you interact with soldiers. I don't like to call it an interaction because there's a soldier who have a military role and you are a civilian, so it's not a healthy interaction. But that was the only way that both, especially the new generation after 1996, the only way that there was communication between both Israelis and Palestinians was through the classes of occupation and occupier, through the military. And I think that led to many side effects that we see it today, because before 1996, at least as we hear from our parents, is that there were a lot of interactions between Israelis and Palestinians in the 80s, in the 70s, before the beginning of the First Intifada.
Wow. How does the fact that Palestinians, for the most part, only speak Arabic and the Israelis only speak Hebrew, and that there's little interaction between the two, how does that impact your life? I mean, even if it sounds like even if you wanted to interact, it would be very difficult.
Yes, I agree with you. The language barrier, especially when there's two people living on the same land and interacting with or living in the same land in the very same area, like settlements and Palestinians, and that constitute a challenge for both sides. Especially for the newer generation, I would say. For the older generation, because we have a lot of Palestinian workers who work in Israel and they speak Hebrew very fluently, actually. But the newer generation, due to this boycott, let's say, between both Israelis and Palestinians, have a language barrier, and the way of life have changed on them. So that leads to some kind of prejudge, looking at each other in a prejudged way. And I think it's not unusual. I think it's very normal, because when there is no way of communicating with each other, only just through official channels, let's say the military, the youth who throw rocks, families who see the army going into their towns. So that's very normal reaction, in my opinion. It's not unusual.
Right. We hear so much about the Palestinian youth throwing rocks and other items as a method of what they call resistance. Did you participate in those types of protests, and why or why not?
I didn't participate. As I said, when the first or second Intifada started, I was 66 years old, and my family didn't allow me to go out from the house in the first place. They were very protective, and they were understanding the situation better than me. And of course, when there's all this kind of utopia, let's say, people throwing rocks and children get affected, so they see this situation, they want to express this emotional trauma that they see, and sometimes they express it in throwing rocks or even other kinds of violence. I believe that violence is a cycle. It doesn't affect one side. It affects the whole society, and it recreates itself. It's like an energy. It cannot be directed only on certain people. it recreates itself and it gets internalized in people, and then it affects the whole society, even if it's in the short run directed on certain people.
In the national Palestinian movement, killing Israelis and Jews is glorified. What do you think about that and the impact it has on your people?
I think that's it's wrong. It's wrong. And as a principle, killing anyone or normalizing killing as a principle or as a reference for dealing with people is a catastrophe, in my opinion. It's not something to be proud of or something to praise. But due to the circumstances that the conflict went on, so people started to praise or to think of those fighters or the national heroes, let's say, that they are the protectors of the people. And it's a very complex relationship actually between any national movement or any movement with the people that they claim that they protect and the people who feel that this movement is protecting them. It's like or a mutual relationship. And with this movement growing, and especially with the continuous violence, this violence and in some way internalizing people, and it leads to some kind of an established value system in which people see the other as worthy of being killed, not worthy of having a life. And this is the catastrophe that I believe that many people are not seeing. The catastrophe is the internalizing of violence, internalizing of dehumanizing the other, and looking at it as something beautiful or something to enjoy or something as not because at the end it's a loss of life. There's another person who have been killed and another family who have lost a member and another child who have lost a parent or a mother. So it's not beautiful, in my opinion. And I still believe that we need to concentrate more into trying to find another ways to transform the ways of conflict into a more non-violent ways.
I didn't want to ignore there also is extremism on the Israeli side, especially with a lot of right-wing settlers. Have you encountered that kind of attitude in some of your work? And if you did, how did you handle it?
I can say that yes, I encountered some kind of violence from the army, mostly. Also from settlers, because we don't go to settlements. Actually, there's still some kind of separation between Palestinian towns and settlements. We can't go inside the settlements unless for some Palestinian workers and others. And we work in routes, which is a land that is a bit away from the center of settlements, but it's close. So yes, there's you get, and that's very normal in such situations, that you get or you encounter violence. But the most important thing is to try to transform this kind of violence, try to communicate, try to find another ways to work in this violence. Because if we want to normalize violence for violence, it's gonna create a cycle, and it's gonna grow up, and this is a big problem.
Yeah, I kind of I was going to talk a bit about the issues, and then we'll get into peace, because I know you do wonderful work at Roots with that. Do you think the Palestinian attitude is still from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and that Israel shouldn't exist? Is that kind of a general?
Mostly, I see it in that way. I see that as a belief, yes, that there's the Palestinians from river to sea, because that's rooted in the Palestinian national thought and the Palestinian identity. We cannot lie to ourselves or say that Palestinians don't have this rooted idea or rooted identity that Palestine from river to sea belong to Palestinians, and this is one of the ways that both identities clash with each other. Of course, it's not It's not a usual situation. But I think it's not also it's not special case. There are many other conflicts that have this the same way or the same characteristics. So that's the idea of roots, is that everyone is rooted in this land, both Palestinians and Jews, and that we need to reconcile those both narratives for both people. We need to find a way to live with each other and to cooperate with each other, because otherwise I don't see any kind of solution, unless if you want to go to in imagination and like some people do, like throwing people in sea or genocide or all that, and that catastrophe.
Speaking of, I know you visited Yad Vashem, which is Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. What did you think of that?
I think it have opened me for a new or a narrative or another narrative. As I grow up, I only heard it from news in general terms, that the Holocaust, that the Nazi Germany. We didn't go in details, or we didn't see how other people see it, or especially Jews. For example, reading about it on the internet. Or when I went to the museum and I saw pictures, I saw some movies about the Holocaust, about World War II, about how people feel, how catastrophic it was, and the amount of inhuman catastrophe that happened in the World War II with in Germany, and especially for Jews. I felt that it relates to me, because and I felt at that moment that we need to learn from this to work and to see how we can solve our conflicts, and not to normalize violence, not to normalize killing people, especially civilians, children, and to feel happy about it, to feel that this is my goal in life. My goal in life is to kill other people, and unfortunately, I like to be honest about such subjects. Is that many people have this reaction, that they want to genocide certain people, or think that if we can kill them, then we will solve the problem. And well, what can we do? We need to work on it, and we need to think about other ways. And our way is to humanize people and let people to express their own traumas or their own beliefs without going or internalizing or seeing violence as the way to solve this conflict.
Okay, well, we've talked some heavy subjects, and now we're going to get into some peace talk. So can you please explain what one of my favorite organizations in the world is all about, Roots Shorashim Judah, and how it works on peace with Israelis and Palestinians, and what you do with them?
Okay, from my perspective, I joined Roots when I was 19 years old as a youth. I'm now a manager in Roots. I joined the youth group, and then we did children camp. In the youth group, it was a great experience that brings both Palestinians and Israelis together. They start to discuss about different topics in a way that makes both sides understand how each side see himself and see the other, and trying to create a shared ground between both sides. Also the children camp, which is the most thing I like in Roots, because that's not something usual at all, that you have with all this complex conflict, especially that you talk about settlers and Palestinians, you're not talking about Israelis and Arabs inside Israel. This project, I think, is one of the most beautiful projects, and one of the most projects that gives hope for trying to find a way or to transform the conflict, and trying to create a better future for both sides. Also, there are other groups like Women Group meetings. We have also Roots Cafe or Judo Cafe, in which people come and they meet with each other, they drink some coffee, and they discuss the normal topics. So I think these usual or normal or spontaneous meetings and people expressing themselves regardless of what they say. I mean, even if someone comes and say that I dislike Arabs or I hate all Arabs or I hate all Jews, I think that's very normal because people are traumatized and people have this kind of perspective. So I can expect that someone will say or come will say, for example, I wish that all Palestinians are dead. That's normal. I know that some people who hear that, they think that's not normal, but here, because of the conflict and the stress of the conflict, many people have this perspective, and we need to communicate with them. We cannot ignore them. This is part of our reality. We cannot work on just that dream. We need also to deal with the reality we have.
How did you originally hear about Roots?
From my friend Muntasir. Just to give a background, is that when as I grow up, I had or we had a friend cycle. Let's say friend cycle. I grew up thinking, discussing about a lot of topics and thinking about a lot of topics related to society and general life. And we did a lot of adventures. So one day he came and he told me that there is a place where both Palestinians and settlers meet in a land, and I thought that he was joking or he's being crazy.
Yeah, those two choices, huh?
Yeah.
It was impossible, I'm sure, to imagine it.
It was impossible, and it was risky, let's say. Not risky in terms of life, but risky in terms of how people would think about it. I mean, we already have, let's say, crossed red lines of regarding religion and regarding other topics. So going to that topic is going to it will be a problem, let's say. So he told me about that. I thought that I thought that he was crazy, but I went back home and I started to read, and I didn't read a lot about Israel Zionism, but I started to read about Zionism in Israel and see, and I thought that this could be an opportunity to go and meet them. Let's see how they think, how they behave, how some kind of curiosity, let's say, because we never met as an Israeli civilian, especially a settler. That would be an adventure. When you are 18 or 19 years old, you think of that as an adventure. So let's go and meet and see and try to communicate. There's nothing. But we didn't plan to continue, actually. I mean, in Roots, we said that we will go and it's going to be an experiment. We'll not tell anyone. And let's see. And we continued.
Yeah. So you were like 19, and can you describe, like, I believe you were there in your first program about a year, and well, I don't want to describe it. Why don't you describe it?
Yeah, sure. Yes, when I first joined, we joined the youth group. It was a group for both Palestinians and Israelis youth between 16 and 19 years old, meeting with each other. And the first thing that we were introduced to is that this group works into discussing about general topics, both not just Palestinian Israeli issue, but also other topics. And that there is a principle that we can agree, which I really liked, is that both sides identity are worthy for them, and that we need to respect both sides' identities, which means that Israelis or settlers recognize the right of Palestinians and Palestinian identity. And I thought that this is a great deal. Like, if he recognizes my identity and my rights, then that's very beautiful. Because one of the most important, or one of the most great challenges that we face, is that people don't recognize each other in the first place. And we continued. We started the youth group. We discussed different topics. Some of them were hard, of course, and some of them were fun. We went on trips with each other. It was actually my first time entering Israel and seeing the beaches with roots when I was years old during the youth group.
Did you cover controversial topics? Did you start out perhaps less controversial, and then as you grew to know each other, it got more serious about the subjects?
We started less controversial topics because that's how I imagine it. I was 19 years old, and there were two or three people who managed the group. Is that the first things that we start to introduce both sides by talking in more less controversial topics, and then we advance to more controversial topics. Because if I want to, or I believe that if I want to start a youth group, and the first topic would be, for example, the Nakba or Holocaust, or it wouldn't be a constructive step for creating a group, in my opinion.
When you decided to continue on and work with the kids, well, you're actually, as far as I can tell, like a success story for Roots, because not only did you go through the program, but you decided to stay and help the kids work on peace together. What age group do you work with?
With the kids from 6 to 9 and sometimes 11, both Palestinians and Israelis. The first camp I joined was a summer camp. It was short, like 3 to 5 days. I joined the first camp, and we did a lot of activities for the kids, fun games, songs, and it was very beautiful to see kids playing with each other and communicating with each other, and it gives hope for our project, and this is very important. And then we evolved, or we developed the program as volunteers also, me and other people, to create a children camp that's not just 3 or 5 days, but it's 5 months or 6 months. And we started the children, or the third children camp, and the fourth one also. Until today, this year, we couldn't do it because of coronavirus, unfortunately.
So who are these parents that are, these are Israelis and Palestinian parents willing to, and really wanting their kids to associate with one another and have a better life? Who are they? Because if you look at the news, this whole conversation wouldn't be happening, because it would be impossible. Even when I posted about today's interview, I got comments that people laughed and basically, are you crazy? There's no such thing as a young Palestinian who wants to work on peace. And all I could do is invite them and say, listen. But tell me who these parents are. Did you get much interaction with them?
Yes, local families. I mean, because we are, as Roots, we are more local, as a local organization. So we have families from different towns and different Israeli settlements that come. In my opinion, a lot of them are wise people. Let's say wise people who have a different perspective on how to try to create connections between both sides, especially on the people-to-people level. And that's how I see it. But it's very, very beautiful, actually, to see that there are parents and families that want their kids to join, and we try to bring more families through normal, or let's say, relationships between people.
How is their interaction with each other? Are they hesitant at first? Do they already have that negativity that they're used to? And what do you do about that? How do you help the kids become more comfortable with each other?
You mean with the kids or with the parents of the kids?
Okay. Both. Let's go both ways because I'm sure it exists for both.
I think for the parents, some families that bring their kids, they think that, or they don't believe that there's such a thing as a children camp for both Israelis and Palestinians, that they have their own fears, of course, that's normal. So they come before they send their children. They like to come and to see the place, to see what we are doing, what kind of programs, what are the people who are working in woods. And we try to create, and this is very important, which is creating trust between us and between the families and the parents and the local communities that we have. So yes, some families come and they feel not hesitant. It's not something, as I said, it's not something usual. We don't have something like children camp the whole West Bank for both Israelis and Palestinians. So it's very normal that some families would be skeptic about this project. And this is the point of creating trust between Woods as a group and between the local communities that we try to communicate with. Between the kids, I think it's much more easier, not like what many people might imagine. I think it's because they're not involved so much in politics and in the situation and in ideologies, national ideologies. So they see the world and from a different perspective. They see the world from a perspective that they want to discover the world. They want to play. They want to express themselves. This is the kids' life. So from what I saw is that children are much more easier, or they find it much more easier in making peace and communicating with other children than adults.
Yes.
So
I know as a mother, I always, before I had a kid, I was excited to be able to teach him all these different things. My biggest surprise was what he taught me. So
yes,
what have the kids at Roots taught you?
they taught me how to live the present, the moment, how to be more positive, to have hope, how to communicate with each other, trying or communicating with each other in a different way or in a different perspective. Sometimes I felt
Go ahead. Sorry.
sometimes when I was working in the children camp, I imagined myself as going back to my childhood and fixing what I have went through by the children that by the children in the children camp. So yes.
That's cool. So what is your community's reaction to the fact that you chose to work with Roots? And Roots, on the Israeli side, are settlers.
Yes, I will add that when we joined the youth program as Palestinian youth, we made an agreement between me and my friends and others, is that no one will tell anyone that we meet settlers or we are part of this organization. I think for the first 3-4 months, no one knew about our participation in Woods because we were a bit afraid of the people's reactions.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, if you can keep a secret forever, this is very normal. So some people start to know or to hear about that. Belal, for example, goes to meet or goes to an organization called Roots. And what was this organization? Who are these people? They are meeting settlers. What? They're meeting settlers, and so you know, things start. So I took a personal decision actually is to tell people, but
Mhm.
on a different way, which is step by step. I call it. Uh, uh, from what I remember is that I started to hint for people that what do you think of someone who, for example, meets settlers? Is it bad or is it good or bad? And then you start to introduce people to a new kind of thing, and then you say that I went to an organization, I met some settlers, and step by step you start to introduce people to what you actually work in. And this is how I did it, and I did it on a personal level. Not all my friends wanted to tell or wanted other people to know, but I felt personally that I don't want to live a life or to put let's say to put a mask in front of people. I believe that I need to, or we need to communicate with people. If we don't communicate with people, and if we don't try to bring and introduce people to new way of thinking, then it will be more like a friendship, let's say that, or a small organization friendship between some people. We don't have other people who can know or learn about us.
How has this changed you and the way you think about things?
Uh, well, I had experience in making some kind of a rebellion against the society or family, let's say in general. When I started to talk about religion and started to introduce new ways of thinking about religion, about society. So I think my transformation started before Roots, but with Roots, I think and meeting other people, I think it provided me with more ways and with courage to work into changing people perspective, trying to introduce people to new kinds or new ways of thinking, especially when there is all this complex situation and there is established beliefs about both sides, how both sides think of each other. And as I believe that we should not always cut the communication between both sides like totally, because if we want to do that, then both sides will see each other only through media or through what happens on the ground between the military and throwing rocks and all of that. And this starts to create a culture in which both sides see each other not as humans, but as enemies that they want to get rid of.
Now, when we were in Israel and ended up running to bomb shelters and all that, obviously that was not on our itinerary. So when you have your different meetings, and have you had to deal with the missiles or other terrorist type things that impacted the kids, and what happened, and how did you deal with the kids, and what was their reaction?
Well, because we live in the West Bank, which
Right.
is far away from Gaza and far away from Lebanon, so there we don't have rockets here.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yes, we don't have we have Clash. Let's say we still in the first phase of Clash, which is throwing rocks and all of that stuff, and the army. But we have seen how the conflict evolved into a more violent conflict, even in the West Bank, with the introduction of stabbing attacks and car rammings. So yes, we there is a stress of conflict that it's growing up. It affects people. When in Roots, we didn't have anyone who throw a rock or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But people come and they tell their experiences, especially the older generation who lived through the suicide bombings, for example, in Israel, who lived through different experiences that the newer generation didn't live with. Thankfully, that we have or we could stop this trend, which is suicide bombings, and try to also work on stopping all other kinds of violence, like rockets and stabbings and car rammings and shootings and all of this stuff.
What are three characteristics that you thought about Jews and Israelis before meeting with Roots and that you've changed your mind about now after this time that you spent with actually meeting and making friends with some?
Well, about Israelis, I think as I thought of them as aliens to some extent. I mean, they have different ways, different language, different way of building homes. For example, settlements and Palestinian towns. Um, I thought that they look different than us. There's no communication. So you think, or from my own personal perspectives, that I thought that who are these people? We just see them on the streets, in the 60 road, which is the shared road for both Palestinians and settlers, but we don't talk with them. We don't have any kind of communication. That was my personal feeling about them. About Jews in general, I don't think that I had this established belief or an opinion on Jews in general, but from the cultural elements, we can say is that people, for example, and especially there's a difference of culture between us and Israel, and also between us and US, is that the way of how people express themselves here is sometimes more traditional. For example, all Jews are bad, or all Jews are responsible for the killing of prophets throughout history. So people use their own beliefs or their cultural elements into how seeing the other side. But it's not, in my opinion, it's not as some people imagine. It's established belief system or value system in which people hate Jews as Jews. It's like they are reflecting certain kinds or certain elements of the culture and the society and religion on the conflict that those, for example, these Jews, for example, have betrayed all contracts since the first prophet that came to them. They don't believe in prophets. They kill prophets. These kind of prejudices, and we try to create a different way of thinking. And also, it might be for some people think that religion is always an obstacle, but there's a shared elements between both Judaism and Islam. And for example, as a faith, as a theology, as prophets. So when people start to meet each other, they feel that there's a lot of common things between both cultures, let's say, between Islam and Judaism, and they start to create a different way of how to communicate with each other, how to cooperate with each other.
I know that beyond dialogue at Roots, when different things happen that it's felt that they're unjust, that people on both sides try to help each other, whether with the authorities or in different situations. Have you ever gotten involved in any of that kind of work?
With the government?
Yeah, but through Roots, how they try to help people with the government or with different, or the police, or in different situations. Can you talk about any of that you were involved with?
I personally wasn't involved with different, let's say, local councils between both Palestinians and Israelis. But Roots as a group, there is a communication between both Palestinian and Israeli authorities, not necessarily on governmental level. I mean, in the higher levels, but on more local levels. For example, the council of towns. Some people or people who have an effect in their own positions. in the local councils and the local councils of settlements. And also at sometimes when trying to solve certain problems, normal problems, I mean like water problems, agricultural problems, if there is someone who went or cut a tree or you know, these normal that we see of them, some people cut trees or burn fields. So we work on that, but it's very important to understand that roots, from my perspective, is that it's a people-to-people organization, not a structure. In a sense, we don't have the developed structure, and this is one of the things I actually love about roots, because I hate or I dislike structures like political parties and all of that, because you don't feel the energy or the space to express yourself and to introduce new ideas and to try to create an innovation, not just to follow the orders from above to down members.
Yeah. I wanted to get into a little of the culture and what you live with, because it's very different in many ways from a lot of people here in the U.S. and what we might call, you know, terrorist attacks and all that. In the Palestinian culture, they're considered freedom fighters, and schools are named after them, etc. What do you think about the promotion of being, say, a suicide bomber or knifing people or car ramming? What do you agree that those are freedom fighters?
So you addressed you addressed in your question both phases, which is the first phase of Palestinian national movement before Oslo and then after Oslo. So there's, in my opinion, there's a difference in circumstances. Before Oslo, there was a conflict. There was actually a war between the PLO mainly and other Palestinian factions and Israel. And this conflict, of course, was violent, and there was, as Israelis or the other side or some organizations or governments consider certain acts of PLO and other Palestinian factions as a terror or terrorism. And I agree with that. I don't say that it was not terror. But I believe that one of the main problems of how we look at terror is that we only select a certain group and we reflect on them that these are the terrorists, but we ignore the other side of what the other side do, for example, which is the government or the occupier or the dominant group, as I like to call it, the group that is responsible or is dominating other people. Or other group. It's not necessarily on a national level. It might even be in the same state, like in Turkey, for example, or in other states that they dominate other people and try to change their identity, attack their identity with the courts, for example. So I see it from my own perspective is that when there is a dominant group or a government that practices this behavior, practices the systematic oppression of another people, that other people will try to resist in different means. And sometimes these means could be, as we have seen with the PLO, it could be very violent. It could be even surprising that who are these people, you know, the killing, the doing, abducting soldiers and all of that. So yes, I agree that it's terror, but we need to try to work on a more just work, in my opinion, and to address the groups or people who are being oppressed, not just in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in also other countries, because it would not be justice to expect from other people to behave in a certain way while they are being oppressed by a government, especially military establishment. I mean, military is involved in oppressing other people by the use of force. So people will try to resist this force with another force, with weapons. This is regarding the first phase of question. The second phase, which is related to the cultural elements, throwing rocks and stabbings and car rammings, are they still seen, or suicide bombings? Are people see them as freedom fighters? And this is more complex issue. I think in the beginning of the Oslo Accords in 1993, and I wasn't born at that time, is that many Palestinians and Palestinian factions, even like PLFP, Palestinian Liberation Front, and other factions, didn't agree on these tactics. I mean, suicide bombings, killing civilians, attacking, and all of these tactics. But with the growth of the conflict and the lack of solution, other factions or other people started to lean more to this trend, which is the trend of violent resistance, as they see it, violent resistance and freedom fighting, and all of this. And I would add that we have, as a society, that we have problems that we don't know who we are in a sense, in a political sense, is that we are not a state and we're not a national liberation movement. We are between both sides. We don't know who we are. We didn't have independence, but we didn't also find other solution.
One of the things when I interviewed Noor Awad, he was saying he chose to be a tour guide because all the college graduates he knew didn't have jobs, and the economic situation there. And I know you put out all this effort and you have your accounting degree, and also here we go again, where finding a job. Now, COVID obviously impacts that, but even before COVID, Noor said that's why he made the decision to be a tour guide. What's it like? You and I assume you're friends, you put in all this time to get your degree, and kids here too. That is also an issue in the US right now, but because of COVID particularly. But what is that like? I mean, it seems like that would be very disappointing. But anyway, I don't want to put words in your mouth. How do you feel about the future for, economically, for what your opportunities will be?
I agree with you. It will be, or especially for the newer generation, it would not be something to be happy about, that you study and you work and you don't get a job, let's say a formal job. So how people, or how as Noor said, that he went to become a tour guide because there are no enough jobs. And yes, and one of the things that we have in our society is that many people work many different jobs, actually. I mean, there are, for example, teachers who work as in stores, work as barbers, for example. So there's some kind of adapting to the situation, I could say, is that people adapt to the situation and try to find different ways to earn income and to continue living. I would say that our society is different, and the way it's composed is also different than the American society or other societies even, because part of our society is that we have the rural areas, and we have the cities, and we have the refugee camps. So these constitute as a social class or social economic classes in our society. I think the most people who are affected is the refugee class regarding the economics. Even though that with the UNRWA and with the Palestinian Authority tries to empower refugees and give them opportunities. And for other people, I would say for me, as coming from a small town, not coming from a city like Hebron, is that the way the family supports how family supports its kids, and some people have land, so they have agricultural work, and they work in different types of jobs, and they work in the land. So there's, let's say, a mix of the social economic ways of how people live. It's not like in the US that someone only works as an accountant and he lives all his life as an accountant, or he goes to get a mortgage to get a home. Here's from my own perspective, especially in the rural areas, it's different, the ways that people communicate with each other. For example, the parents sometimes might build homes or apartments for their kids, even when they are 18 or 19 years old, if they have the ability, the financial ability for it. So yes, but I would add that from a youth perspective, that you want to feel that you are participating in the society. You want to feel that you are independent, or trying to be independent, not just being dependent on your family. Even if your family can support you, or other people can support you, the way, or the youth want, or have this energy that they want to share in the society.
Well, that's the same as here, that's for sure. I see it with my son, who's 5 years younger than you, but still in college and all that.
Yeah.
But yes, the independent stage.
Exactly.
We're waiting for him to come back, even though he's here. When I see an Israeli soldier with their guns, I see someone keeping Israelis safe, or me when we were there. But the Palestinians that I've talked to certainly don't look at an Israeli soldier like that. What do you see when you look at an Israeli soldier?
As I grew up, I saw them as people to be afraid of. Something not usual. We don't see soldiers, for example, Palestinian soldiers with weapons and going inside homes and doing all that stuff. So you feel that these people, or you internalize that these people are the authority. Let's say they are the authority. As one time my father said, when I had a problem with a soldier, he said, "How do you dare to oppose the authority, that these people have guns?" I said that I think the newer generation is different than the older generation. So yes, for Palestinians, they see the soldiers as an authority, as a power, or as let's say as an occupiers, as an occupation army that tries to set a standard that I am here. I control you military. I control you through checkpoints, through military towers. I can go inside your homes, your towns, and I can do whatever I want. So people, in my opinion, react, and then the army react, and then the younger generation reacts. They start to throw rocks, and then it grows. It becomes a cycle. It grows, and everyone starts to blame each other. For example, the Israelis say that the soldiers or the army is protecting us from the terrorists, or protecting us from people who throw rocks. And when you go to Palestinians, they say the same thing, that we are being forced. We have army that comes to our homes and to our towns, and they do that and that. So it's a circle for both sides. You cannot say that that one side is the total victim and the other side is the total oppressor. It's a circle of oppression and oppress that keeps growing between both sides.
Unfortunately, we're low on time, so I only have a couple more questions I can ask. But one comment in our pre-interview that I have not been able to get out of my head was I was asking you about COVID,
Yes.
and your reaction was that you weren't as worried about COVID. You'd be much more afraid of being killed by an Israeli soldier, and that just hit me in the gut. And I haven't been able to get it out of my head since. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that really is horrific. But anyway, if you could explain that.
Yes, I think from my perspective, or the way as I think, and even a lot of youth or a lot of young people think is that, for example, regarding the current situation with coronavirus, is that the youth, or me, for example, don't have that much risk of being killed or dying because of a virus than to die by a soldier, because the way how I can describe it is that, for example, if I leave the town and there's a checkpoint and I do or make a mistake, any kind of mistake, sometimes like reaching your pocket to give the ID for the soldier, or the soldier misunderstands that as you're trying to reach a knife, for example. So from my own perspective, I see that the risk or threat of being killed by a soldier is much more higher than being killed by coronavirus. And this is the reality. I'm not saying that there is the risk is much more higher than we don't take care about the virus. But for me, when I heard about all these closures and all of these things, and when you asked me about that, I answered you in a way that I will not die because of a virus. Most likely, if there is a risk with my age as a youth to die, is mostly from a soldier or a car accident or other unusual circumstances.
Oy, okay. The last question. If you were speaking to the people of the world, what would the message be that you would want them to know about your work on peace in your community?
I think the message that I want to send for the people of the world and even for ourselves is that we need to, and about our work, we need to concentrate on the human and psychological and social side effects of wars and of conflicts, and the way that it contributes to the continuation of conflicts, and it recycle itself and make the conflict much more harder or much more complex, as we see, for example, with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is that it became much more complicated. And from my opinion is that, and that's how I see it, is that we have a lack of concentration on dealing with the side effects of the conflict that are not seen in the short run, the side effects that affects the society, that affects the psychology of people, that affects the children, that affects the whole society, and the society's it becomes an intergenerational trauma, and then it evolves to become a culture. And this is why I believe that we need to address very important, which is the communication between people, not just governments. Governments, they might do wars, or they might, for their own agendas or for their own things that the usual people are not, or are not relevant with. But with the people, for example, there should be an organization, so there should be an addressing of how this conflict affects both sides and affects people in general, and try to lower the stress of the conflicts. This is very important. If we follow how the conflict goes, we are simply giving the conflict the opportunity to grow into a more violent and monster conflict. And this is what I see it in not just with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in the whole Middle East, actually. I might want to add to explain my perspective. Maybe this is not something or it's not something usual how people see the conflicts. For me, I see the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as a mirroring for other conflicts, not just between both Israelis and Palestinians, but even in the whole region, because each one or each group of people start to reflect their own problems on the conflict that happens between Israelis and Palestinians. And this is what I have noticed or saw in the Middle East, especially regarding government propaganda. For example, that we oppress you because we have an outside enemy. The outside enemy is, for example, the Zionists or Israelis or Jews. So they start to create a dictatorship in their own countries. Using the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I look at the conflict as something that recreates itself over time when we don't deal with it on different levels. I mean, if we try to hide it or if we try to ignore it in some ways, that it will come in the future in a more violent conflict. And this is what I see that happened in both Israeli and Palestinian conflict and in the whole Middle East, in my opinion. From what I see, that the governments or politicians are taking cheap decisions all the time. I mean, the decisions that satisfy certain agendas or certain economic agendas and social agendas without looking on the long run. Like, for example, propaganda, you know, this is a bit complex issue or a complex topic, as certain governments or certain movements try to create an identity for people. For example, let's say for Syrians, for Palestinians, for Egyptians. So the propaganda or the theory that we need to be with each other or stick with each other because there is an outsider enemy that would come and take the land or would conquer us. And this through time starts to internalize and then creates a culture that is based on the idea that those group of people are our enemy, and we need to I mean, they start to excuse all kinds of injustices inside the country itself because there is an outside enemy. So people, for example, what happened during the Arab Spring, from what I saw, is that many people started to explain the situation, their own situation regarding certain civil wars, is that Jews have done this civil war, or Zionists or Israelis, and this is the idea that some governments or some people or some movements have implanted in their own nations in order to create a military dictatorships, because that's how the military works. It tries. This is how the way military people think. The only way that they can create a state is to manipulate people and try to tell them that there is always an outside enemy, a Zionist, Israelis, whoever the enemy is, it doesn't matter. But the idea is that the only way that they can stick the society together and they can convince people to support the government, which is usually a dictatorship from military people, is to reflect all these problems on other people. So from what I see it, what happened during the Arab Spring is not something unusual. It's actually the production of certain governments that use this. Even though if you want to go in their own private relationships, they have relationships with Israel and with different governments. But when it comes to their own people, they always use this tool in order to make them only think about the outsider enemy, so they don't think about their own issues, economic issues, social issues, about all the dictatorship, about prisoning people, all these prisons that we have in the Arab world, about destruction that I see. For example, Arab governments or the Arab world, we are the lower or the lowest in all kinds of standards, social standards, economic standards, scientific standards. Nearly, we don't have any kind of achievement other than the military achievement, as some governments like, because this is the only way or the only thing to give to their own people. The only thing to give to their own people is that we have won a war and there's an outside enemy. And this enemy also changes with time. I mean, so for example, when there's a peace with Israel, then it changes to another enemy. It could be Islamic terrorism, for example. It could be a group of people, as they say, the fifth column. Those people who are trying to oppose the government, so they put all kinds of demonizing on them in order to continue in this way of governance, which at the end it will collapse. I mean, the destiny of any dictatorship is to collapse. It will not stay forever because it's built on against all kinds of human way of life. The humans want to express themselves. They want to be part of the government. They want to see how the government works. They want to see their own economic situation gets better, scientific situation. So until when you can continue using this kind of propaganda, I mean, creating ideologies and put them in the people. So this is very important. And I see for myself, is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for me is important, but it's more important for the whole region, not just for the Israelis and Palestinians. I feel that trying to work in solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and giving a model, for example, a democratic model, and that we have solved the problem through peace, and we take the excuse from other governments that they use, that there is Israel that tries to go and conquer us and all that kind of stuff. So our work is not just helping both Israelis and Palestinians. We are helping the whole region, actually, not just Israelis and Palestinians. If we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think many governments will be in a very bad situation because they don't have any more the outsider enemy that they can
scapegoat, huh?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think you're an accountant with a large side of poli-sci and history in there too. But that was terrific, Belal. I want to thank you so much for this great conversation. I know I learned so much from you, and you have a very different perspective from the young adults that we often see on the news, and I'm grateful for that. I wanted to mention that we have some very interesting guests in the weeks ahead. Next week, Saskia Keeley will be our guest at Peace with Penny. She is a professional photographer who works on peace by teaching women caught up in the conflict to document each other and their lives through the eye of a camera lens. She helps not only with improving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but she empowers women. Amen. Her work puts a big smile on this women's liberator's face. To our listeners today and those listening to the recording later, thank you, and may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.